everybody. Welcome back from Christmas break. I was off for a little bit, being busy as usual, and all the other things that go into making the holidays happen. So today, because it's near the end of the year, I'm going to show you all of the quilts that I finished within the year. So this is a year-end wrap-up of everything that I made in 2024. I personally, for me and my sewing studio, I don't count any of my quilts ever unless they are finished. That means binding on and washed and completely 100% finished. Then I count that. I never count quilt tops or works in progress. Again, that's like just for me. In the very beginning, when I first started, I just kind of made this little rule for myself that I was never going to post anything online unless it's finished, because that kind of gave me a little incentive to want to finish something. It's like, well, now I can post it and share what I'm working on. So I kind of still work like that, even though now I've been doing it for so long, I'm pretty sure I'm going to finish what I start. So I have a stack of quilts here, and I'll just take you through them in the order that they were finished in 2024. Okay, this is the first one. This one I finished on January 23rd. And this one too, I just kind of made it up as I went along. I did kind of like how, when I see quilts online, I will see like a very strong separation of color. Sometimes they'll use like a log cabin block or half square triangles. So I did mine with half square triangles. And I also, when I set these blocks like right together, I didn't like how, the points were going to like touch each other. I wanted a little separation in there. So what I did is I put a blue border around half of the blocks, and then I put a white border, which you can't tell there's a white border, but there is, around the other half of the blocks. And I really like the way that turned out. And this one too, you can see like I kind of was going through all of my scrap things too, because the center of these, I think, is a good place to use up some things that you've either been hoarding or things that you want to use up. So for instance, I don't know, you can see this one here is just a strip set of scraps, and that was a good place to put that. Some of them I went into some of my favorite things to fussy cut. This one is a little basket of kittens. And over here I have, let's see, here it is. Here's some bunny rabbits in there. And some of these, like this is just a pinwheel, but this just came from having just excess half square triangles. So that one I made a pinwheel out of my leftover triangles from a previous project. And this one I just set the triangles just like that. So yeah, this is a sort of planned general concept, but then also sort of, looking for some things that I could use up some leftovers. And the pinwheels around the outside too, that I just kind of made up, and those were all just leftover scraps also from other things. And the back of this, I really liked the back of this one. This is a sheet, but it was only a twin sheet, which is clearly not big enough for the size quilts I make. And so I knew I had to make it, wider to fit. Almost all the time too, if you ever use sheets for the back of your quilt, from top to bottom, they're almost always going to be long enough that way, but it's the width that you need to fill in. So, so I have a shoe box that sometimes when I get bored and I just want to do like mindless sewing, I'll make some 4 patches. And so that shoebox, that's all that holds, is some random 4 patches. And I've been trying to sort of keep them in a general color family. I'm not really super specific about it, but this quilt I thought needed a lot of greens and blues. So I put one wide strip here that's got 2 groupings of 4 patches to make a 16 patch. And you can see there's a lot of green in there, but it's not all green. And then the one over here, I went into my blues, and there's a lot of blues and yellows in here. And this is just a single row of 4 patches all the way down. And I really like doing that with kind of making these things ahead of time, because I know a lot of times I have to put a piecing on my back. And so I just go into that shoebox then and find things that just take me very little effort to complete the strips for the back of a quilt. Okay, the next quilt that I finished was this Orphan block quilt, and this one I finished on February 23rd. And I really liked working on this one a lot. I used a lot of it. It was, I don't know, maybe most of it I think is like genuine Orphan blocks. But there were some things that I made too that I thought it's time to get that out of the box and kind of throw it in here too. And so just to kind of walk around a little bit, I also did, you probably can't really see, but I was doing a little bit of hand embroidery, not knowing where that was going to end up. And so I had a couple of really little pieces of that. There's a little watering can that I did. And then also I was putting on some fancy stitching from my my sewing machine. You know, we all have those fancy stitches on our machines that we don't really use that much. So I also got out some, this is like a variegated thread, which I also don't use very often, but this is what I mean, like when I mean like I like to play with my quilts. It's just kind of whatever strikes me at the moment, and I just like pop it in and it works. And so let's see, some of these are like genuinely Orphan blocks that are old, like this brown one here, that's old. This one here too, that was an old one. That kind of looks like 1990s era to me. And this one, this letter D, I don't know what that really stands for or like why that was originally made. And then I couldn't figure out, I put it on its side and it's like, is that supposed to be an A or is it a D? And I settled on a D because I thought the A, I thought maybe the legs should be a little bit longer if you look at it sideways. But some of the blocks too, I'm just like always surprised at how difficult some of the blocks are to make. And I'm also surprised at sometimes the ones that people chose to hand piece and hand sew versus sewing on a machine. So for instance, this little scarecrow down here at the bottom, that was all pieced by hand, which kind of surprises me because it's also not a really old vintage block, but that was all hand pieced, and there are some really tiny pieces in there. And then I always like the classic Sunbonnet Sue's and Overall Sam's. So I had a couple of these. Oh, and I also had a little piece of this this fabric here. It looks, I think it's French because it looks like the Eiffel Tower is back here. But I didn't have much of it, and I've been kind of saving it, hoping to, you know, just tuck it into a quilt somewhere. And so here it is. And here is some more stitching on the machine. I was just trying out a different decorative stitch. And let's see, oh, down here, this I made, this I got some foundation paper piecing when I was at the Houston Quilt Show. I only went there 1 year, and I think they called them cupcake papers, maybe. And so I got them, and you know, the samples that they have up in the booths are always so pretty. And so I started making these blocks, and I did kind of put it together, and their original block was supposed to have hand embroidery around this edge. And I like to embroider. You would think that I would have finished it, but I didn't. This sat for like 3 or 4 years, and it's like, you know, I just keep moving to the next project and the next project, and I never came back to it. And so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to put it in this quilt. To me, it's like I need to clear this out. It needs to find a home. So I put it in here. So this was meant to be a little wall hanging, actually. So I just put the whole thing in here. And again, on the outside of this, I used a decorative stitch on my sewing machine on the black part out here. And this is just a decorative ribbon that I had too. Sometimes I throw those in too. And here was like a little, meant to be like a border fabric here. So you take all of these different parts and you kind of fit them all together, and it makes its own very unique quilt. And I just love having these displayed and on my bed because I think there's so much to look at in them. Okay, and the back of this one is, this was another one. I used a sheet, but I didn't have enough of it, again, because I never do. So I liked this pattern here. This was the top cuff along the top of the bed. And so I picked it all out and I opened it up. So it gave me a much wider piece. You know, normally it would be folded in half, you know, at the top of the sheet. So I really liked that design on there. And then I did have to stick in a little piece here that is not as noticeable as most of my pieces are. So that's the back. I don't know if you can see the quilting on it. This one has a pretty much quilting on it. I did each block differently, and I didn't plan anything before I quilted it. When I got to that block, I just kind of figured out, or just made something up, I guess, as I went along. So this is, so this was finished in February. Okay, so this one has a little story to it. This is an ocean waves pattern made with men's shirts. Now this quilt that I'm holding here, I did not finish this one this year. I think this I finished the previous year. But the reason I'm showing this one is because I made one identical to it, but I just don't have that quilt anymore. I had, you know, one of my good friends from years and years, her husband had died years ago, and she saved all of his shirts, and she was finally ready. I mean, it's been like 20 years. So she was finally ready to do something with the shirts. So she asked me if I would make a quilt for her, actually for her son, her adult son. And so this is the pattern that she chose. She really liked this ocean waves pattern. So I made this exact pattern for her out of her husband's shirts. So that's why I don't have that quilt anymore. But this is what that quilt would have looked like. And that one I finished in March 6th is when I finished that one. Okay, and the next one on my list is this one here. This was one of those patterns that I just saw online somewhere. I don't know where. Yeah, I like to give credit where credit is due, but I just see so many images and so many pictures online. so I'm not sure. But anyway, so I made this one again. It's all scraps, like really, really scrappy. Um, I've showed this before, but when I get small scraps, I sew them into strips like this, and it's just haphazard. The only thing I try to do now with these is I do try to kind of keep them in general color families, because I really think that I'm more likely to use these that way. I could put, like all my blues, I could put around the outside of a quilt and use it like as a blue border, or things like that. So this one, as you can see, is, I get that one here. This one is mainly blues, but also some greens in it, because my blues, I was getting an awful lot of them, and my box was getting really full, but I didn't have enough to do an entire quilt. But once I started the quilt, it was like, I need to finish this. This box is already full of stuff, and I don't want this to get worse. I don't want it to get out of control. So I grabbed some greens too, and I just kind of threw some greens in too. And I really like how it turned out. I think I might like it better that it has the greens in it now. And because it's a scrap quilt, I also put a scrappy binding around the outside, and I tried to grab mostly my blues and some greens for my bindings. And so I was able to use up some leftover binding strips for that also. I have some green over on this side. And the back of this one, that is just one solid piece of a blue. So look what I did. I made another one, but not really. I finished this one. This is May 9th. I finished this one. And like I said previously, I don't count my quilts at all unless they're actually finished. But the top of this quilt, I had this made for a couple of years. And after I made it, I kind of wasn't that thrilled with it. So it had to sit in timeout for a little bit. And it was in my bedroom. I have a little quilt ladder, and it was hanging on there for a couple of years. And so after I did the previous one, I thought, actually, I think I finished this one because I didn't actually have another one to hand quilt at that time. I think when I finished that one, I just didn't have anything at the time to put in my hoop. And that was part of the reason why I just grabbed this quilt top off of my quilt ladder. And I just finished this one up then. And yeah, I just like looking at these things too, because I kind of remember a lot of the places that, you know, these scraps came from. And again, they span decades. I have some in here probably from the 50s or 60s all the way up until the present. And so let's see, there's not really too much to say about this one other than it's the exact same pattern as the one previously. But this one also, because this is really scrappy, I also have a scrappy binding on this one too. And this one, I really didn't try to curate the colors as much on this one, because the top itself has so many different colors in it. And I always just have more little leftover scraps to use. But a quilt like this is a really good place to put those leftover pieces. And then the back of this one, again, it's just a sheet. And it just looks pretty, like springtime. So it's just a sheet from the thrift store. Okay, next up on my finishes is this one. This is a simple Jacob's ladder pattern. And again, I saw this online from, I think somebody was going through some booths at a quilt show, and this was kind of hanging in the back of one of the booths. And the Jacob's Ladder pattern isn't unique in itself. I just really liked how they had it colored, you know, with their color placement. And so, so I copied their color placement on it. And this one is made, this is all men's shirts. All the reds and all the blacks are all men's shirts. The only thing that is not are these sashing strips here. And then this whiter border here is not. But everything else I took out of my men's shirts boxes. And I even like put an additional little outside border on to try and use up everything that I had out of my boxes at the time. And I think this one's one of my favorite ones that I made this year. I really like it. I think it's just, I don't know, I just like the way the colors come together. I think it's really striking. And I will probably make another one. Maybe not in red and black, but I think maybe if I just choose two colors and just make it sort of two colors, but yet scrappy. So I might do this one again. And then this one also has a scrappy binding. These were all my reds and blacks. Here's a little bit of a black binding. I don't have a lot of black bindings, but I had some. And then the rest of all the reds were leftovers. Here's another bit of black. They were all leftovers from other projects that I've made. So this is the third quilt in a row where I've just gone into my bag of scraps for the binding and used them. And I I never empty that bag, but I did put quite a dent in it. And the back of this one is, there's only a little wee bit of piecing on the back. And again, this was from that box where I keep all my 4 patches. So I looked for my blacks and I just put the blacks down. I almost had enough of a backing to cover the whole thing, but it's never quite enough. And the rest of it is just yardage that I had. So this one, I finished this one in May also. This I finished on May 23rd. And here's one that I really like too. It's really hard to choose a favorite because I try to make all my quilts different, but they're all scrappy. This one is all men's ties. I shouldn't say that. Rewind. Men's ties, and I also had some pieces of like Dupioni silks that I used to make like crazy quilts a while ago, and so I have collected like a lot of like different kinds of fabrics like for that. But because all the men's ties are silks, I also got out, like this is a pale green, that was a Dupioni silk. This light blue down here, that was also one. And I just had some, this too, this teal colored one. I put those in because I think it kind of calms some things down a little bit so it's not quite so busy. And I think they paired really well, you know, with the colors that I put them with. So I've been collecting men's ties off and on just for years because I don't want to pay a lot of money for ties. They can really get expensive. So I'm so cheap that our thrift store, they kind of have like, you know, like the Goodwill, I think, has like color-coded tags, and our thrift store has the same thing. So they'll have like special days, like say, for instance, like all their red tags are like 50% off, you know, or whatever the discount is. But then our thrift store, they'll start with like 50% off, and then the next day it's 60% off, and so on until they get to a day where just all red tags would be 10 cents. And so when I go look at the men's ties, I'm only looking at the ones that have red tags on them, or whatever color the tag it is of that week. And so a lot of these I got dirt cheap. Some of these actually too, I got at that 25-cent sale that I go to. So those are my two main sources for these. And I did put a very lightweight fusible backing on all of the ties and the silks before I used them. Because the ties are always made on a bias and they're very slippery to begin with. I think it's really hard to feed things like that into your machine evenly without things really slipping and getting out of control. And so this one too, very, very simple construction. You know, it's just, you know, different stripes, and you just lay every block, you know, one horizontal, one vertical. And I did it this way because, again, I also, like you, I watch a lot of videos, and one of the videos that I had seen last year was, the channel is called Dave's Craft Room. I don't know if you watch him. He's very entertaining, and I really like what he does. And he made a tie quilt that was similar to this. So I kind of like took the idea from him, but yet made it my own. And the all of my little leftovers, it's just on this side and that side. I don't have them at the top and the bottom of the quilt, but I did want to use as many of them as I possibly could. And this one too, let me get a little bit closer. I want to show you that I also put a decorative machine stitch on there. This must have been the year for machine stitching for me. I don't do a lot of machine stitching as a rule, but I was really happy with how that one turned out against that black. And then on the very outside here, I had, maybe this was part of the reason why I was doing this too. I think so. I have so many threads that were gifted to me, and I just want to use them up. And so this red thread here, I think was a rayon thread. It's a little bit shiny. And so I just put 2 stitches along there, machine stitches of the red threads too. And I really like it a lot. So that's my tie quilt, and the back of it is just all one piece for the back. Okay, we're into July now. I finished this one on July 11th, and let's see, the story behind this is, let's see, my sister made a quilt with, the pattern is just called a square in a square, and she made 3 different sizes of that block, and then she just kind of put them all together and made them all fit, and it was so nice when it was done. It was just so effective. I really liked it. I liked how your eye traveled across the whole top of the quilt. And so I stole that idea. I always steal my ideas. Except instead of that block, I chose this block instead. It's like I call it an Ohio star, but I'm not quite sure, you know, because if you modify a block even a little bit, then it gets called by a different name. But in my head, this is an Ohio star. And so I did different sizes than she did, but I still kept the same idea where I made them in 3 different sizes. And I have so many browns, so many brown fabrics in my collection, because when I started quilting, that was the color. I mean, that was like, well, not the only color, of course, but it was very prominent because it was kind of like a homespunny, country, old-fashioned, you know, kind of retro kind of look with a lot of fabrics when I first started. And so a lot of, you know, what was in my collection was, you know, was those fabrics. And then I had also inherited a lot of fabric just along the way from other people who are cleaning out their stashes. And of course there's always browns in their stashes. So I really don't work with browns a lot these days, but I kind of put it on my list of things to do in 2024 because it was, I got to make a brown quilt, even if I only make one, and, you know, don't put brown in anything else, even if that's the only thing, at least I used some of the browns. And I really like how this one turned out a lot. I was really surprised that I liked it that much, even though, you know, it's just a brown quilt. And I also, within the browns, it really isn't 100% brown because as you can see, there are golds in here too. Some of them tend to be a little on the yellower side. And here's one. It might be hard to see on camera, but this is really just a green on the back. But if you put it with other greens, it looks like a brownish green. But when you put it with browns, it reads much more green. And then some of them tend to be more of like rusty reds also. But you kind of need some definition between your colors too, so that you can see each star individually also. So most of it is just the stars, but there are some places where I did choose to fill in, you know, certain areas with maybe just some single blocks. Here's an hourglass block here that I used to fill in, but it was still with all of the fabrics that I had out that I was working with in this quilt. And then the outside, in order to use up, you know, just more of my browns, I put not just one sawtooth border, but a double sawtooth border around the outside, because I don't mind making triangles and matching all of them up. I really like how that looks on the outside. And then the back of this is a flannel sheet that I just happened to find at the quilt store, actually, at the time I was making this quilt. And so that worked out really well. So this didn't stay in my stash at all. This just got used right away. And then as you can see, it wasn't big enough, so I had to piece it. So again, hey, look, here's some more of all those 4 patches that I make ahead of time, and they found a place in this quilt too. I also throughout the year I haven't of course emptied out that box of 4 patches, but it's pretty empty compared to what I started with at the beginning of this year. And then I had this striped print too that I really liked, and I just kind of wanted a little bit more of a pop or pizzazz, you know, to go with it. And this is another one too, just the idea of making the same block in 3 different sizes. I really want to do that again. So I'm trying to figure out like what kind of block do I want to use. So that might be something that's coming up in 2025. Either that, or if you're familiar with the Barnstar quilt, it's kind of the same premise where they use blocks of all different sizes, but they used different blocks too. But there were so many different sizes in the quilt, and they just made sure that everything kind of matched and fit together. I really liked the idea of that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens next year. So this one I finished in July, on July 11th. Okay, this is August. Now I finished this one on August 13th, and this is called the Perkiomen Valley pattern. And I do live in the Perkiomen Valley. I live in the Upper Perkiomen Valley, and this is where this pattern originated, and this was a popular pattern in this area for quite a long time. And all of these, what I read, you know, the up and down is supposed to represent the hills and valleys, you know, of our region. And this is made out of, primarily out of men's shirts. So I do use the men's shirts. I've actually used a lot of them this year, but I keep getting more too. I really like how these look, especially the blue ones. Well, I shouldn't say that. I really do like how they all look at the end. So yeah, so this is a Perkiomen Valley pattern. And on the outside here, if you look just the top and the bottom border here, again, this is how I use my white scraps. When I get really small pieces of whites, I just sew them diagonally onto a piece of newspaper, and I just keep them in a box. And then if I think I can use them on a quilt, they're ready to go. So it's not like I have to piece the quilt first and then think, what am I going to put on the border? I already have these, you know, that are ready to go. And sometimes this is what I call mindless sewing, because I know it's easy. I don't have to think about anything. I don't have to measure anything. And I'm just finding a home for all of my scraps. So the back of this one is not pieced. This one is a sheet also. And I was able to use the whole sheet. So there's no piecing on the back of this one. Okay, we're into September. You may notice this one from one of the last videos where I did a trunk show just on my red and white quilts. This one was in there. This one, and if you watch that video, you know I have another red and white one coming up also. So it may look like I did them both at the same time. They were finished pretty close to the same time, but I didn't work on them at the same time. This one was just another thing that kind of happened slowly over time. I started with the 9 patches, and anytime I had reds, this is where my reds went, was in 9 patches with no idea at that time what they were going to become. So when I did go to use them, most of the 9 patches were already made, so I just had to make the stars then. So this one came together pretty quickly. So this is my red and white quilt. So that will get added to my red and white collection. And then the back of this one, also a sheet and a big piece in the back. This is a big piece of, they call this a cheater cloth because it looks like patchwork, but it's just printed that way. And then some red poppies on the sheet, which are really pretty. So this is September. Okay, October 12th for this one. This is just a lot of flying geese, an awful lot of flying geese. I don't really have much of a story to go with this one. I had, I think this one started off because part of the way that I sort and organize my scraps is I have like a stack of like 3.5-inch squares, 4.5-inch squares, or 5-inch squares, you know, like that, 2.5 inches. So I think, I'm not sure, I think this one may have started off with 4.5-inch squares to make 4 flying geese at a time. And so I think that's how this one came about, is I just needed to use up some of those squares because I was getting too many of them. So, and I don't use black as a background a lot, but I think, you know, when you have things that are so colorful like this, I think the black can really make it pop. And so I was really happy with this. And the back of this one is just a solid piece of the mint green, which I kind of like how the mint green looked with the black. It's not the same fabric as this border is. It is a different fabric, but they look like they belong together. So that was, that's October. Okay, and here's another one for October. This one went really fast. That's why I was able to finish 2 of them in October. The other one previously, the flying geese, that one took me a while. That was a big one to quilt. This one went really quickly. And again, this came about because I had a box that I put small pieces of fabrics in, just all different colors. And then you know, when I'm working on something, that's the first place I go, is to use up those smaller pieces. Well, I guess I had used almost all of those colorful pieces before, because almost the whole box then ended up being these really dark colors. Just dark, you know, blacks and the browns, tans. There's a little bit of purple in here that's really dark, and a little bit of dark green, which I really like kind of how they pop out. So basically the whole reason that this one came about was because I needed to get into that box and use some of the stuff that was in there. And this one too, because this one isn't as large as most of my other quilts are. I knew this was going to be smaller. I just wanted to use those pieces up. And so this one is not a quilt that, let's see, how do I put it? It's not going to be one of my favorites. It's certainly not going to be one that's ever going to get passed down to anybody. So I thought I'd just make it the size to use on the sofa. And so that's why this one is smaller. This is the smallest one I've done this year. And I just put polyester batting in this because the polyester was cheaper to use. So I didn't have to use my good batting for something that I knew was just going to be used as a couch quilt. So I started laying this on my sofa, and my cat kind of claimed this as his own quilt. And my cat's name is Ollie. And so now this is Ollie's quilt, and he sleeps on it every day. Okay, so many of you may have seen this one before, because this was also in the red and white trunk show that I just had. And this one I finished in November 12th. I finished this one. And this has a Baptist fan, hand quilted design all over the top of it. And you can get the full story in the white and red trunk show. But basically I was just kind of working on little blocks here and there. A lot of times I would make 2 of them at a time that were the same block, but I tried to like change up the colors a little bit. I also tried to put in blocks that use different techniques, like English paper piecing and foundation paper piecing. There's a little wee bit of applique, and there's some blocks that are just done with embroidery. And some of the blocks were a little more challenging because there's so many tiny pieces in it. But yeah, so this one was done in November. And the back of this one, this has a pieced back. Actually, I made the back of this before I made the front of this, because I know I piece a lot of my backs. And so I kind of thought it would be easier for myself if I piece a back first, knowing that a quilt will come after. And so this is the back that I pieced for this one. It's a great big carpenter's wheel. It's a bonus, you get 2 for 1. Okay, this is November 25th. I finished this one, and I know it seems like I really did do a lot of quilts this year. But this one went fast because I didn't piece this top. This top I bought at a fabric sale that I go to out in Ephrata. And so all I had to do was basically quilt it up. I really do like the vintage quilts, and I kind of feel like I have to save them, and I like that, you know, they get hand quilted. So I would do a lot more, but they're getting harder to find, I think. When I first started quilting, that was another thing, like with the antique malls in the area, you would always see, you know, vintage, either the whole quilt finished or just the tops, and you just don't find them anymore. So this one, again, I didn't have to piece it. I did take the border off that was original to the quilt. The fabric was very thin, and I didn't feel comfortable with it. And it actually, that white did not match the white in the quilt either, but you're never going to match your whites anyway. So I just put this white on myself. And then for the back of it, I pieced the back of it with men's shirts because I have a lot of men's shirts. So I just made 10-inch squares, and then some of them at the end, when I couldn't get 10 inches, I would just get 5-inch blocks and piece those together then too. So yeah, this is just men's shirts on the back of this. I love doing these vintage quilts and hand quilting them. So I only have one more for the end of the year. Okay, and here we are at the very last one that I finished this year. I just finished this one on December 17th. And this is one that I've been also working on for a really long time. This was kind of like a project that I kind of kept in the background, so to speak, where when I would get little, really tiny scraps, I would cut them into 1.5 inches, and they all finish at 1 inch. And I had originally bought an Orphan block for, I don't know, $1 or $1.50 that was like this. That was not done exactly like this. I don't know what they did. It was original piecing. I'll just put it that way. But I really liked it anyway, even though it was not certainly conventional how it was pieced. I really liked it. So that's why I started doing this. And as I got my little tiny scraps, then I would put together, you know, a star here and a star there, and then I would just tuck them away. And so this was another thing that it was, I probably had about 16 of these, and I just kind of felt like it's close to being done now. Now I need to get it done. So the last 4 I did do like all together, like all at once. And so now it's finished. And this one, I put prairie points all around the outside of it. And this was a very last minute decision that I did this because, again, I have all these stacks of squares that are pre-cut. And I believe these were 3.5 inch squares. They were, yeah. The stack was getting like too big to even fit in its box anymore. And so I chose predominantly blue, but with other colors as well. That way it still gives the scrappy look, but there's enough blues that kind of make it a little more cohesive for the top. And this one, there's a lot of quilting on this actually. That took me a while to do the star blocks. And the back of this, there's a little bit of a story to the back of this one. Again, the back wasn't big enough, so I did have to piece it. But the strips that you see in there with the little Ohio stars, the blue and the orange, I was originally going to put these on the front of the quilt as a border. And I chose the blue and the orange. My thinking was, maybe you can see these a little more together here. My thinking was, you know I needed a border, and when I kind of looked generally at the quilt, there's always going to be some color that stands out a little bit more than the others. And I was seeing a lot of the men's shirts, and I was seeing the oranges that popped out at me. But I didn't want this to compete with this. So I wanted it to be a little more muted than what this is, because I wanted this to be the star, so to speak, of the show. So I made these pieces to go as a border, and then when I laid it out next to it, I didn't like it at all. There was just something a little off about it, something that, just to my eye, I just wasn't really happy with it. So they're on the back, and I like it a lot on the back. So that's how that ended up on the back. So I made it, and it didn't go to waste. I still used it. So that was it for this year. I have let's see, there was one that I couldn't show you at all because I don't have it anymore. That was a commission quilt also. That was a bear paw that I made that had little bits of yellow in it. That was what the client had requested. And I also made some pillow shams for her to go along with that as well. And that turned out really nice too. So there are 2 quilts that I've made this year that I don't own anymore, but all the rest are here quite happily. So I think all together I've finished 17 quilts this year, which is, I don't think I've ever done that many before. That was a lot. It didn't feel like a lot when I was doing it, so it even kind of surprised me. But keep in mind now, this is 2024 is the first full year that I've been retired. I retired last year, but I worked the first 5 months of 2023. So yeah, so this was a good year. This is so much better than working for a living. I get to get up every day and do what I love to do. And you can tell, like, I love doing this. That's why I get a lot done, is because I wake up excited every day to work on something that I really love doing. So I hope all you guys feel the same way about the projects that you're working on. And I hope that it brings you as much joy as it brings me. So let's go into the new year together and see what we can get done next year. And thank you so much for joining me, and thank you everybody for all of your kind comments too. We do read them through and we try and answer as many as we can get to. And by we, I mean my daughter. She's the one who videos me doing all of this, and she edits all of the videos for me, which is extremely kind because I couldn't get all of this done and do everything that she does also. So again, thank you so much for joining me this year, and stick around. We'll see what next year brings. Bye.